Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we really try to cut through all the noise and get you straight to the core insights from the latest research.
That's the goal.
And today, we're tackling something that, well, it affects pretty much everyone. Personal finance.
Definitely a universal topic.
Just think about it for a second. How many of us feel genuinely, completely confident making the best financial decisions?
Probably not that many, realistically.
Exactly. Whether it's, figuring out retirement savings, managing debt, which is a huge one, or even just basic budgeting day to day, it can feel, frankly, overwhelming.
It really can. The complexity seems to grow all the time.
And the data actually backs this up. It suggests a surprising number of people consistently make decisions that aren't quite optimal, even though these choices have a massive impact on our well-being, our future security.
That's absolutely right. And it's not just a local issue, it's global. We see it everywhere.
Right.
In advanced economies, sure, people struggle with undersaving or making maybe inefficient investment choices, leaving them exposed.
Yeah.
But it's also super critical in developing countries. People there often face these huge, unpredictable shocks, could be health problems, natural disasters, you name it, often without enough insurance or the financial tools to ride it out.
It leaves them incredibly vulnerable.
Exactly. And this widespread, really personal challenge is precisely why there's been such a big push for years now for more financial education.
Right. Financial education, it's often presented as the answer, isn't it? The key solution. Sometimes feels like it's sold as a kind of magic bullet.
It often is, yeah.
But here's the real question, and maybe where things get confusing.
Yeah.
Does it actually work? Because if you've looked into this yourself, you've probably seen completely conflicting stories.
Oh, absolutely. The literature has been all over the place.
You've got some studies like Fox et al. Back in 2005, or Lusardi and Mitchell more recently, really emphasizing, yes, it's effective, painting a pretty hopeful picture.
Right. Those are quite positive.
But then flip side, you have others, like Willis in 2011, basically arguing the opposite, saying it's, largely useless or the impact is tiny.
A very strong counter-argument there.
And even the bigger picture reviews, the meta-analyses that tried to combine studies like Fernandez et al. Or Miller et al., they didn't really agree either.
No, they didn't converge, which left things murky.
Exactly. It's just left this whole area covered in this thick fog of uncertainty for regular people trying to figure things out and for policymakers trying to make good decisions.
It's been genuinely tough to get a clear signal through the noise. The different methods used, the scope of the studies, sometimes just, frankly, a lack of really rigorous data. It made clarity really elusive.
Okay, so that's where we come in today. Our mission on this deep dive is to try and cut through that fog.
Let's do it.
We're digging into what looks like a truly groundbreaking meta-analysis. It's by Kaiser and Lukas Menkhoff, and the title really says it all. Does financial education impact financial literacy and financial behavior, and if so, when?
That when part is crucial.
Totally. Because this isn't just another review skimming the surface. It's a systematic, quantitative look at a huge amount of data. 126 separate impact studies.
Wow, 126.
Yeah. And get this, that covers 539 distinct effect sizes. They're really crunching the numbers here.
That's a massive data set to synthesize.
And that massive data set allows them to give some of the clearest, most solid answers we've seen so far to this incredibly important question. Important for you listening, for policymakers, for everyone.
And what's so valuable about their approach, as you hinted, is they don't just ask if it works. They dig into the determinants. What makes it work better?
Exactly.
By systematically coding all the circumstances. How long was the course? Who was taught? How was it taught? Across all those studies, they could really unpack what factors actually move the needle. It's way more powerful than just averaging everything together.
It's about the why and the how, not just the what. So by the end of this deep dive, our promise to you is you'll have a real shortcut to being properly informed on this. You'll get clear insights into how financial education really impacts financial behavior and literacy, and crucially, the specific conditions that make it most effective. For you, and maybe for people you know.
Sounds like a valuable journey. Let's unpack it.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. Why is getting this right, understanding the real impact, so critical? We touched on it, but the stakes are just incredibly high, aren't they?
They absolutely are. These suboptimal financial decisions we talked about They're not rare edge cases. They are remarkably common. And they hit individual welfare hard in ways that go way beyond just the bank balance.
Like what specifically?
Well, think about chronic undersaving for retirement. That's a huge one. So many households just aren't putting enough aside, or maybe they're doing it inefficiently, suggesting, a real struggle to cope with financial markets that just keep getting more complex.
It feels like a looming crisis for a lot of people.
It does. And it's not just retirement. It's how people structure their investments, maybe taking too much risk or not enough, or choosing products that don't really fit their goals.
Right.
We see it in borrowing habits, too. Getting into excessive debt, or maybe using really expensive forms of credit, high-interest cards, payday loans that can trap people in a really stressful cycle.
That debt cycle is brutal.
It is. Or sometimes it's simpler. Just not participating effectively in the financial system at all, missing out on opportunities for growth or even basic security.
So these aren't minor blips.
Not at all. And like I mentioned, in developing countries, the impact can be even starker. It can leave people completely exposed to major life shocks without the tools to absorb them. That's the powerful motivation behind this global push for financial education, trying to equip people better.
Okay, so given that strong motivation and all that conflicting information we mentioned earlier, how did Kaiser and Menkhoff actually cut through it? What makes a meta-analysis like this different, more powerful than those early reviews?
Yeah, that's key. A meta-analysis isn't just someone reading a bunch of studies and giving their opinion. It's a specific quantitative method. It's designed to systematically combine the results from many different empirical studies that all ask the same basic research question.
So it's about the data, not just the conclusions.
Exactly. It treats the data from all those studies almost like one giant combined study. For this paper, Kaiser and Menkhoff meticulously coded the specific circumstances of the financial education in each of those 126 studies.
Everything. Duration, method.
Pretty much. Duration, teaching method, target audience, setting, all of it. And the systematic coding let them really investigate the determinants of success, not just calculate a simple average that might mask important differences.
Okay.
And crucially, they focused only on interventions, actual training programs, counseling sessions looking for what researchers call exogenous variations, changes caused by the education itself, not just pre-existing differences between people.
So they're really isolating the effect of the teaching.
That's the goal. It gives a much stronger basis for understanding causality. Did the education cause the change?
Right. So it's not just comparing, say, financially savvy people with less savvy people and assuming education made the difference. It's looking at actual programs and their direct effects.
Precisely.
But how do you compare results from potentially very different studies? They might use different tests, measure success differently. How do you put it all on the same scale?
That's where the statistical magic comes in. They used a standard technique called the standardized mean difference, specifically one called Hedges G.
Hedges G. Okay, break that down for us.
Think of it like this. Imagine one study measures success with a 10-point quiz. Another uses a 100-point test. Comparing raw scores doesn't work. Hedges G converts the difference between the group that got the education and the control group into units of standard deviation.
Standard deviation.
Exactly.
Like how spread out the scores are.
Exactly. So instead of saying Group A scored 5 points higher, Hedges G says Group A performed, say, 0.3 standard deviations better than Group B. It gives you a universal yardstick.
Okay. So it lets you compare apples and oranges, basically.
That's a great way to put it. Whether it's a simple question on interest or a complex mortgage scenario, Hedges G puts the impact on a common scale-free unit.
That makes sense. And you mentioned we need some context for these Hedges G numbers. How do we know if a number is big or small?
Yeah, a really useful rule of thumb comes from Jacob Cohen. Back in the 70s, he suggested some benchmarks. Basically, an effect size below 0.20 is generally considered small, around 0.50 is medium, and anything above 0.80 is large.
So small, medium, large. Okay, 7.2, 0.5, 0.8.
We'll keep referencing those benchmarks as we discuss the findings, so you can get a feel for the real-world magnitude of the effects they found. It helps translate the stats into something more tangible.
That's super helpful context. And I understand their approach was particularly rigorous because of the types of studies they were able to include, especially more recently.
Absolutely. This meta-analysis really benefited from a major positive trend in financial education research. The big increase in randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, especially since around 2011.
RCTs, Like in medical trials.
Exactly like that. They're often seen as the gold standard for establishing causality.
Yeah.
You randomly assign people to either get the intervention, the financial education, or be in a control group that doesn't.
And that randomness is key.
It's key because it helps ensure that, on average, the only real difference between the groups is the education itself. Any difference in outcomes is much more likely to be caused by the education, not by some other factor like people who are already motivated choosing to sign up.
Got it. So it reduces bias.
Greatly reduces bias. This high internal validity, as researchers call it, means we can be much more confident that the effects they're measuring are real treatment effects, not just selection effects. It really strengthens the reliability of their findings.
Okay, so they've got this huge data set, rigorous methods focusing on causality. What did the landscape of financial education actually look like across these 126 studies? What kinds of programs were being tested?
They broke it down into 4 main types, which gives a really good overview. The first, and by far the most common, representing about 83% of all the effect size estimates, was classroom financial education.
The traditional approach.
Pretty much. Think schools, universities, workplaces, even community centers or microfinance groups in developing areas. These are often set up as quasi-experiments or full RCTs, which gives researchers good control over the content and measurement.
So that's the bulk of it. What else?
Some of those classroom studies also looked at things like mandatory financial education in schools. Now, the internal validity might be a bit weaker than a perfect RCT, but the external validity, how much it reflects the real world, can be very high because you're looking at large, diverse populations over time.
Right, real world policies.
Yeah.
Okay, so classroom is number 1. What's next?
Second was online financial education. This made up about 8% of the estimate. So evaluating things like online learning modules, instructional videos, maybe interactive financial planning apps.
More tech-driven stuff.
Exactly. Then a much smaller category, only about 2% of estimates, was individualized counseling.
One-on-one help.
Yeah, mostly studied in the U.S. context, often focused on tackling very specific, quite serious issues like helping homeowners facing foreclosure manage mortgage debt or guiding people through bankruptcy. Very tailored, very intensive.
Okay, and the last category, I think you mentioned an interesting example there earlier.
Yes. The fourth type was informational and behavioral nudges. This covered about 7% of the estimates. These are generally lower intensity things, maybe an information fair at work, handing out brochures, sending text reminders.
Simpler interventions.
Right. And the really cool example within this category was what they called financial edutainment. One study actually looked at weaving financial messages into a popular TV soap opera in South Africa.
Seriously? Like characters balancing their budgets on screen?
Kind of. Characters making financial choices, facing the consequences, learning lessons, subtly teaching the audience through the storyline. It's a fascinating, more non-cognitive approach, trying to influence behavior through entertainment. Shows the real breadth of what they considered financial education.
Wow, from classroom lectures to soap operas. Okay, that sets the stage. Let's get to the core findings. After analyzing all this data, what did Kaiser and Menkhoff find overall? Does financial education move the needle?
Okay, the headline number. Across all the different outcomes they measured, literacy, behavior, saving, borrowing, everything, the average effect size was Hedges' G, 0.148.
0.148. Okay, so remembering our benchmarks, that's below the small threshold of 0.20, but you said it was statistically significant.
Yes, statistically significant, which means it's very unlikely to be 0 or just a random fluctuation. There's a real positive average effect. However, and this is a big however, the study also found that the heterogeneity across studies was very high.
Heterogeneity. You mentioned that word before. Remind us what that means in practical terms again. Does it mean that average of 0.148 is kind of hiding big differences?
That's exactly it. High heterogeneity means the results varied a lot from study to study. Some interventions might have had a much bigger impact, maybe well above 0.2, while others might have had virtually no impact at all, close to 0.
Okay.
So that average of 0.148 is just that, an average. It tells us there's something positive happening overall, but it strongly signals that the specific circumstances really, really matter. How it's taught, who it's taught to, when it's taught. Those factors dramatically influence the outcome. You can't just say financial education works, it doesn't work based on that average alone.
Got it. The devil is definitely in the details here.
Yeah.
So let's break down that average. What about the impact specifically on financial literacy, just the knowledge part? You said earlier that's where things looked more promising.
Yes, absolutely. When you isolate the impact on financial literacy itself, people's understanding of concepts, facts, skills, financial education comes out looking like a clear success. The average effect size there was a much stronger. Hedges G equals 0.263.
0.263.
Okay.
So that is above Cohen's small threshold of 0.20. That sounds pretty meaningful.
It is. It's a robust finding. To put it in statistical terms, financial education in these studies explains about 1.7% of the total variation we see in people's financial knowledge scores.
1.7% of the variance. How should we think about that? Is that a big jump in understanding for someone?
Think of it maybe like this. It's not going to turn someone from a complete novice into a financial guru overnight, but it represents a reliable, measurable improvement in understanding for a significant portion of people. It lifts their foundational knowledge. And importantly, the study points out this effect size, 0.263, is actually pretty comparable to what we see from educational interventions in other core subjects, like math and science teaching at the university level. One big meta-analysis found effect sizes around 0.47 for active learning methods versus traditional lectures in STEM fields. So financial education holds its own.
So it's roughly in the same ballpark as teaching effectiveness in other established fields?
Pretty much. If the main goal is simply to increase people's financial knowledge and understanding, the evidence is clear. Financial education works quite well. People do genuinely learn the material.
That's a really positive and important baseline finding. People do learn. But then comes the harder part, right? Does that increased knowledge actually translate into changing financial behavior, doing things differently with money?
That's always the million-dollar question, isn't it? Moving from knowing to doing. And yes, the impact on behavior is smaller, but it is still there and statistically significant. The average effect size for behavioral outcomes was Hedges G equals 0.086.
0.086. So noticeably smaller than the literacy effect, and definitely in that small range, maybe even below what some might hope for.
It is smaller, yes. But importantly, even when they restricted the analysis just to those super rigorous RCTs, they still found a significant positive effect size of G equals 0.08. That strengthens the confidence that this isn't just noise. It's a real, albeit modest, causal effect.
Okay, a real but modest effect. How does that 0.08 compare to attempts to change behavior in other areas, like health?
That's a great comparison. The paper notes this effect size is actually quite comparable in magnitude to what researchers often find in health promotion studies looking at behavioral change, things like interventions trying to help people lose weight, eat better, or exercise more.
Right, those are notoriously hard habits to change too.
Exactly. One review mentioned in the paper found an average effect size of about 0.1 for computer-delivered health interventions. So while the effect of financial education on behavior might seem small, it's actually in line with what we see for other complex human behavior changes. It tells us it is possible to move the needle, even if it's not a dramatic leap.
Okay, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
It's hard work, changing behavior. Now, the common sense idea is that knowing more should lead to doing better. Did the study find that direct link between the literacy gains and the behavior changes?
They did look at that specifically for the studies that measured both outcomes. There were 31 of those. And yes, they found a positive relationship. On average, a 1 standard deviation increase in financial literacy scores was associated with about a 0.23 standard deviation increase in positive financial behaviors.
So more knowledge does correlate with better actions.
It does correlate, yes. But, and this is a really important nuance, the statistical confidence intervals for the average literacy effect, around 0.26, and the average behavior effect, around 0.09, did not overlap.
Didn't overlap, meaning?
Meaning, they are statistically distinct effects. While knowledge helps and is likely a necessary step, it's clearly not the only factor driving behavior change. It's not a simple A to B conversion. Other things are going on.
Like motivation or opportunity or...
Exactly. Things like psychological biases, environmental factors, access to suitable financial products, they all play a role. It suggests we really need to analyze literacy and behavior separately when figuring out why some interventions are more effective than others. Just boosting knowledge isn't automatically guaranteed to change what people do.
That's a critical point. It's not just about pouring in information. Okay, now let's talk about those surprising non-results. What factors did the analysis find didn't seem to systematically matter for changing financial behavior, despite what we might intuitively think?
Yeah, these were quite eye-opening and challenged some common assumptions. The meta-analysis found several characteristics of the interventions that showed no systematic impact on financial behavior. Things like the age of the participants, or their gender, or the specific setting, whether it was taught in a school, a workplace, a community center. Or even the delivery channel, like online versus in-person classroom teaching, once you controlled for other factors like intensity.
Wow. So all the effort sometimes put into designing, say, very different programs for young adults versus older adults or men versus women, that might not be making a difference to the actual behavioral outcome.
According to this comprehensive analysis, those factors didn't emerge as statistically significant drivers of behavioral change overall. It doesn't mean they never matter in a specific context, but system-wide, across hundreds of studies, they weren't the key ingredients for success in changing behavior.
That's fascinating. It suggests maybe we're focusing on the wrong things sometimes. So if age, gender, setting, and channel don't explain the variation in success, what does? You mentioned that high heterogeneity. Where does that come from? What makes financial education work better?
Right. That heterogeneity is the puzzle, and the study really digs into explaining it. A core finding, maybe the most robust one, relates to intensity.
Intensity.
Yeah.
Meaning just doing more of it.
Essentially, yes. The principle seems to be more is more. They found a clear, positive relationship. Increasing the intensity of the education significantly boosts its effect, particularly on financial behavior.
Okay, can you quantify that for us? How much does more help?
Specifically, they calculated that an increase of 1 hour of financial education per week leads to an average increase of 0.004 standard deviation units in the impact on financial behaviors.
0.004 per extra hour per week. That sounds small.
It sounds small per hour, but think about it over the course of a program. The average intervention in their sample lasted about 9 weeks, with maybe 4 hours of teaching per week.
Okay, so about 36 hours total on average.
Right. Now, if you were to double that weekly intensity, go from 4 hours a week to 8 hours a week over those 9 weeks, that sustained extra effort could boost the average treatment effect by about 14% compared to the typical program.
Ah, okay, so it adds up. A 14% bigger impact just from doubling the time commitment each week.
Exactly. It really underscores the importance of sustained, focused effort. It's like learning any complex skill, a musical instrument, a language. A quick one-off intro workshop gives you the basics, but real fluency and the ability to apply it comes from consistent, regular practice over time. You probably can't rewire deep-seated financial habits with just a 2-hour seminar.
That makes intuitive sense. You need reinforcement. Okay, so intensity is key. What else did they find that significantly boosts effectiveness?
Another really critical factor is delivering the education at what they call a teachable moment.
Teachable moment, like when something is immediately relevant.
Precisely. It means timing the financial education so it directly connects to a financial decision or situation that the person is facing right now or very soon, making it immediately relevant and applicable. And this factor was strongly linked to a much bigger positive effect on behavior.
Okay, that sounds powerful. How much bigger are we talking? Does the data show a strong effect here?
Oh, absolutely. Providing financial education at a teachable moment was associated with an increase in effect sizes of a substantial 0.079 standard deviation units.
Wow, 0.079. Compared to the overall average behavior effect of 0.086, that's almost doubling it.
It's a huge boost. It results in a predicted effect size that's nearly 50% larger than the average effect they found across all studies. It really highlights the power of relevance and timing.
Can you give some examples of what that looks like in practice?
Sure. Imagine teaching someone about managing debt right when they're actively struggling with missed payments, or discussing different ways to send money home, remittances, with migrant workers just before they plan to send funds, or explaining retirement savings options to someone who just started a new job with a 401k plan.
Right. The information lands differently because it solves an immediate problem or answers a pressing question.
Exactly. The immediate relevance makes the learning stick and motivates action in a way that abstract, generic advice often fails to do. It connects the knowledge directly to a real-life need or opportunity.
That's incredibly powerful. Meet people where they are when they need it. Okay, now for something that seemed a bit counterintuitive, what about making financial education mandatory, like in schools or workplaces?
Yes, this was a really interesting and perhaps slightly controversial finding. The study found that making financial education mandatory was actually associated with smaller effect sizes.
Smaller. You mean less effective?
Less effective, yes. Mandatory participation was linked to a decrease in effect sizes by 0.074 standard deviation units. In fact, the predicted effect size for mandatory programs, especially in more developed economies, was very small and statistically indistinguishable from zero.
Wow. So forcing people to learn about finance doesn't work as well. Why would that be?
The likely explanation boils down to intrinsic motivation. When people are required to attend when it's not voluntary, they might just not be as engaged or receptive.
Like just going through the motions.
Exactly. They might sit through the class or click through the online module just to tick a box, but they aren't necessarily internalizing the information or motivated to apply it. It echoes that old saying, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah. Personal interest and relevance seem key, and mandates might squash that.
It seems that way. Engagement is critical, and forcing participation might undermine that vital spark. It's a really important consideration for policymakers thinking about universal mandates.
Definitely a challenge to that approach.
Okay.
Now, moving beyond how it's delivered, what about who is being taught? Does the effectiveness differ based on the target group? You mentioned low-income individuals earlier.
Yes, and unfortunately, the findings here present a significant challenge. The study confirmed that financial education appears to be significantly less effective for low-income clients, defined relative to the average income in their country. It was also less effective overall in low and lower middle-income economies.
Less effective for the very groups often targeted by these programs. That's tough.
It is. The coefficient for low-income clients was negative and statistically significant, negative 0.065. It suggests that education alone might struggle to overcome other barriers these individuals face, perhaps lack of access to good financial products, instability, or more pressing immediate needs.
And what about the other end? People with higher levels of education or in wealthier countries?
Interestingly, there seem to be diminishing returns there as well. The impact of financial education tended to decrease as the average income and years of schooling in a country increased.
So it's less effective for the poorest and also potentially less impactful for the most educated or wealthiest populations.
It suggests that for populations that already have a high baseline level of general education and possibly financial literacy, the marginal benefit of additional general financial education might be smaller. The cup is already somewhat full, so adding more has less impact. They might need more specialized advice or perhaps face different kinds of financial challenges.
Okay. And just to confirm again, age and gender, still no systematic effect in this deeper analysis.
Correct. Consistent with the earlier findings, even in the detailed multivariate analysis controlling for many factors, age and gender did not emerge as significant predictors of how effective the financial education was in changing behavior.
That's a remarkably consistent non-finding. Okay, let's dive into the specific types of behavior. You hinted earlier that some are much harder to change than others. What did the study reveal there?
This is where things get really practical. The analysis showed that the success of financial education varies quite a bit depending on the specific behavior being targeted, and some are definitely harder nuts to crack.
Which ones proved most difficult?
Borrowing behavior, particularly anything related to managing debt, seems significantly more resistant to change through conventional financial education. The average effect size for borrowing outcomes was tiny, just Hedges' G equals 0.02, and it wasn't statistically significant from zero.
Wow, basically no measurable impact on borrowing habits on average. That's sobering.
It is. It suggests that simply teaching people about interest rates or the dangers of debt doesn't reliably change how they borrow. Similarly, the average effects for influencing insurance uptake, G 0.05, remittance behavior, G 0.03, and general bank account behavior, G 0.00, were also small and statistically insignificant, although these were based on fewer studies.
So these more complex, often immediate or downstream financial decisions seem really tough to shift with education alone. Why do you think borrowing in particular is so resistant?
It likely goes back to what we discussed earlier. Debt decisions are often driven by immediate needs, financial stress, emotional factors, or powerful cognitive biases, like focusing on the present rather than the future.
Right, the abstract knowledge gets overwhelmed by the immediate situation.
Exactly. Financial education might address the knowledge gap, but it struggles to overcome those deeply ingrained psychological responses or pressing situational factors that often drive borrowing choices. It's more than just an information problem.
That makes a lot of sense. So if borrowing is tough, where did financial education show comparatively better results? Which behaviors were easier to influence?
In contrast, the effect sizes related to saving behavior, and particularly retirement saving, tended to be higher than the average impact on borrowing. Budgeting also seemed to yield comparatively stronger effects than those downstream behaviors like debt management.
Okay, so encouraging saving, retirement planning, budgeting, these seem more responsive to education.
It appears so. These behaviors often involve more deliberate, forward-looking planning. Maybe there's less immediate emotional pressure involved compared to, say, taking out a loan in an emergency. This might make them more amenable to being influenced by rational learning and the application of new knowledge gained through education.
So focus on building positive upstream habits, like saving and budgeting, might be more fruitful than trying to directly fix downstream problems like debt through education alone.
That could be one interpretation, yes. Or at least, changing saving and budgeting habits might be more achievable with standard educational approaches, while tackling debt might require those much more intensive, timely interventions we discussed.
It's clear that nuance is everything. Let's dig into some more of those nuances. What about the reliability of the findings based on the research design? You mentioned RCTs versus other methods. Did the gold standard RCTs show weaker effects overall?
That's a really important check on the findings. They did compare results based on research design. For financial behavior, the RCT still showed a statistically significant positive effect, G 0.081. It was only slightly smaller than the effect found in quasi-experimental studies, G 0.093.
So even the most rigorous studies confirm a real positive effect on behavior. That's reassuring.
It is. It tells us the positive effects aren't just an artifact of weaker study designs potentially inflating results. The effect holds up under the highest standards. Now, for financial literacy, the gap was a bit bigger. RCT showed an average effect of G 0.209, while other designs showed G 0.394.
So non-RCT designs might overestimate the knowledge gain somewhat.
It seems plausible, yes. But even the RCT effect on literacy, 0.209, is still clearly positive and significant, right around that small but meaningful threshold. So the core finding holds. Education boosts literacy, and to a lesser extent, behavior, even in the most rigorous studies.
Good to know the findings are robust. Now, let's circle back to the country differences. You said financial literacy gains were much higher in high-income countries compared to developing ones.
That's right. The average effect on literacy was G 0.328 in high-income economies versus G 0.145 in developing economies. A pretty substantial difference.
But you also mentioned a kind of paradox, that even though the overall effects might be lower in developing countries, there's a hidden advantage related to marginal returns. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's a subtle but important point. While the average impact might seem lower in low and lower middle income countries, perhaps due to factors like less developed financial markets or other institutional challenges, the starting point for financial literacy is often much lower too. The average level of general education, years of schooling, is lower. This means that the marginal return, the benefit from each additional piece of financial knowledge can actually be quite high. You're filling a relatively empty cup.
So a small intervention might represent a bigger proportional jump in understanding for someone in that context.
Exactly. That's the idea. So even if the absolute effect size measured by Hedges G is smaller than in a wealthy country, the impact on that individual's ability to navigate their financial world could still be very significant. This might also explain why mandatory school programs seem less problematic there, and why the teachable moment factor, while still good, might be slightly less critical than in developed countries where people already have more baseline knowledge. There's just more fundamental ground to cover.
That's a really insightful way to frame it. It's not just about the absolute number, but the relative improvement. Yeah. Okay, what about low-income individuals specifically? Wherever they live, we know they're a tougher group overall. Do the same principles apply for making education more effective for them? Like intensity and teachable moments?
Yes, the analysis suggests those core principles still hold true for low-income clients. Intensity helps, and teachable moments are beneficial. In fact, the study specifically highlights that the teachable moment seems particularly important for this group.
Even more important than for others. Why?
Presumably because their immediate financial pressures are often so high. Abstract financial advice might feel completely irrelevant if you're worried about making rent next week. But education delivered right when it addresses an immediate pressing need that's much more likely to capture their attention and feel valuable. That teachable moment provides the crucial hook to make the learning relevant and actionable amidst daily struggles.
So hyperrelevance is key for low-income groups. Now, let's look at that really difficult intersection. Borrowing behavior among low-income individuals. Did the study find anything about how long the effects last in that specific challenging scenario?
Yes, and it's another sobering but important finding. For borrowing behavior specifically among low-income individuals, the positive effects of the intervention seemed to diminish as more time passed between education and when the behavior was measured.
So any positive changes in debt habits might fade away over time for this group.
It suggests that, yes, the treatment effects might be shorter-lived. This really underlines just how hard it is to create lasting change in debt-related behaviors, especially for vulnerable populations. It implies that one-off educational programs are probably not sufficient.
What would be needed instead? Ongoing support.
Potentially, yes. Ongoing support, maybe regular refreshers, or perhaps interventions timed repeatedly at key moments might be necessary to sustain positive changes and prevent people from falling back into problematic debt patterns. It's a high-needs area requiring persistent effort.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, digging into the nuances of this meta-analysis. Let's try to synthesize this. What are the big, overarching policy lessons that emerge from this deep dive? What should policymakers, educators, or anyone designing these programs take away?
Well, the first and maybe most crucial takeaway is optimistic. Financial education can work. It demonstrably improves financial literacy, and it does have a positive, albeit smaller, impact on financial behavior, so the effort isn't wasted.
That's the good news. What's the caveat?
The big caveat is the high heterogeneity. It means there's no simple universal formula for success yet. Designing effective programs isn't about blindly following a standard. It requires really careful, nuanced attention to the specifics, the who, what, when, and how. No one size fits all.
So customization and context are everything.
Absolutely. We also learned that boosting financial literacy is a relatively achievable goal, and these interventions perform reasonably well compared to education in other fields. That's valuable in itself and a key step towards behavior change.
But behavior change is the harder part.
It is. Getting people to actually do things differently requires more strategic effort. The clear levers are increasing intensity, more sustained engagement, and skillfully leveraging teachable moments to maximize relevance and impact. And we have to be realistic about the challenges, particularly with certain behaviors like borrowing and certain groups like low-income clients.
Right. So building on that, how should we tailor the approach for those specific subgroups, say, for developing economies?
For developing economies, the lesson seems to be acknowledge that overall effects might be lower due to background factors, but recognize and leverage the potentially higher marginal returns. Focus on building foundational knowledge where it's most lacking, as even modest gains can have a big relative impact.
And for low-income clients specifically?
Recognize the inherent difficulty, but double down on strategies that work. That means ensuring sufficient intensity, but perhaps most critically, putting extra effort into identifying and utilizing those teachable moments to make the education immediately relevant and compelling amidst their pressing financial realities.
And for that really tough area influencing debt behavior, what's the takeaway there?
That it requires the most focused and substantial effort. Conventional, low-intensity education is unlikely to move the needle much. Success here probably requires significantly increased intensity and very precise timing at teachable moments. It's about targeted, potent interventions. And learning from specific examples, those best practice cases that did show success in changing debt behavior, becomes absolutely crucial. We need to understand what made those specific programs work.
Okay, this raises the question of future research. To make financial education even better, what more do we need to know? Where are the gaps?
There are several key areas. First, we simply need more high-quality evidence, especially from outside the United States. The U.S. currently dominates the research landscape, accounting for nearly 2/3 of the studies. We need more robust evaluations from diverse global contexts, particularly developing countries.
And better information from the studies we do have.
Yes, definitely. Future studies need much better documentation of the program characteristics. What exactly was taught? How was it taught? What was the quality of the teacher training? How is the curriculum implemented? These details are often missing, but are vital for understanding why a program succeeded or failed. We need to get inside the black box of the intervention.
And what about the practical side for policymakers, the cost?
That's a huge gap. Information on program costs is frequently missing from these studies. To make informed policy decisions and assess welfare impacts, we absolutely need to balance the measured educational effects against the actual cost of delivering the intervention. We need cost-benefit analysis, and right now, the cost data is often just not there.
That makes evaluating efficiency almost impossible. Finally, stepping back, should financial education be the only tool in the toolbox? Or should policymakers be looking at other approaches too?
That's a critical question. This research strongly suggests that while financial education is valuable, it shouldn't be seen as the only solution, especially for complex behavioral issues like debt. Policymakers really need to consider alternatives or complementary strategies.
Like what kind of alternatives?
Things like potentially limiting the availability of certain complex or predatory financial products, using insights from behavioral economics to alter the choice architecture. Think nudges like automatic enrollment in savings plans or simplifying information disclosure.
Making the easy choice the good choice.
Exactly. Also promoting commitment devices, offering direct incentives for desired behaviors, or implementing stronger consumer financial protection regulations. It's about using a full suite of tools, recognizing that education works best as part of a broader strategy, not necessarily as a standalone magic bullet.
So pulling this all together for our listeners, what does this deep dive mean for you?
I think it shows that financial education isn't some instant fix, but it absolutely is a worthwhile tool when it's done thoughtfully.
It's not magic, but it's not useless either.
Precisely. It's about being intentional, designing programs that are intensive enough, that understand the specific audience, and crucially, that find and leverage those powerful teachable moments to turn knowledge into real, practical action. And it's important to remember, the average effects might seem small, but many of the studies involved quite limited interventions, often at low cost. So even modest, well-targeted efforts can make a difference. The key is learning from what works best and continuously improving.
Okay, so to recap, we've unpacked this major meta-analysis. Financial education clearly boosts financial literacy. It also improves financial behavior, though to a smaller extent. Intensity and timing, those teachable moments, are key drivers of success, especially for behavior change. Mandatory programs, less effective. Low-income groups and debt behavior, definitely challenging, requiring more tailored, intensive approaches. It's a much clearer picture than we had before.
It really is. It gives us a much better roadmap for designing smarter, more effective interventions that truly connect with people's financial lives.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering the proven power of the teachable moment and the limits of generic education, what financial decision or challenge is happening in your life right now, or maybe in the life of someone you care about? Could that be an ideal teachable moment to seek out or apply some specific financial knowledge?
And given that effective interventions don't always have to be hugely expensive, how much focused, well-timed learning, maybe just tackling one specific issue when it's most relevant, could be enough to spark a significant positive change for you or your community?
Something to think about. There's always more to learn and apply, and hopefully this deep dive has given you some valuable insights to help you do just that.
We hope you can use these insights on your own financial journey, or perhaps share them with others to help make a difference.
That's all for this deep dive into the real impact of financial education. Thanks for joining us. We hope you feel a bit more informed and empowered. Join us next time for another deep dive.